We're going to travel back in time for this talk today, a little bit. In fact, more than a little bit, 52 years to be precise. The year is 1968. And it was a year of turmoil in our country and our world, in the midst of the Vietnam War, racial strife, violence in our streets. I wasn't very politically aware or socially aware at that time. I was 13 years old. I was wrapped up in myself. It was normal, as normal as that gets. But you couldn't help but be aware of what was going on in the world at that time as well, and frightened by it and worried about it. I know my mom and dad certainly were, and older brothers and sisters, other people in my circle of family, friendship, and my school life as well. And as we approach this national holiday for Dr. Martin Luther King, I remember a particular date in that year, 1968. In fact, the date was April 4th, 1968. It was a Thursday. It's about 6 o'clock in the evening. And soon after that, we got the news that Dr. Martin Luther King had been assassinated, that he was killed, murdered. I remember going to school the following day, April the 5th, the first Friday. Those are really big. They still are in our Roman Catholic tradition. I remember going to school and seeing Sister Paula Marie, really tough sister of Providence, break down in the classroom and cry over the assassination. I looked up a speech by another figure from that era, Senator Robert F. Kennedy, RFK, and his reaction to that assassination. I want to read just a very short part of his speech that evening. In this difficult day, in this difficult time for the United States, it is perhaps well to ask what kind of a nation we are and what direction we want to move in. For those of you who are black, considering the evidence, there evidently is that there were people, white people, who were responsible for the assassination, and there was a white person responsible for that. You can be filled with bitterness, with hatred, and a desire for revenge. We can move in that direction as a country, in great polarization. Black people amongst black, white people amongst white, filled with hatred toward one another. Or we can make an effort, as Martin Luther King did, to understand and to comprehend and to replace that violence, that stain of bloodshed that has spread across our land, with an effort to understand with compassion and love. Very powerful words, very prophetic words. Almost exactly 2 months later, June 4th, 1968, Robert F. Kennedy would be assassinated as well. Such a terrible time of violence, such a terrible time of division. And we're still experiencing that in our own day and age. And I wanted to share with you a reflection that I wrote very recently as we approach this holiday of Dr. Martin Luther King. And as we find ourselves in the midst of racism and strife, violence in our capital. I was literally a kid. We're going to go back a few more years, from 1968. Just a kid. I was enjoying a very warm and all too soon disappearing summer in the San Fernando Valley in the August month of 1965. A routine traffic stop quickly devolved into a full-blown race riot. Violence, vandalism, looting, and destruction were the order of the day. Threatened citizens in nicer neighborhoods checked their weapons if they had them, and their ammunition too. I know people who did that. They hunkered down in their homes, frightened, wondering if the riots would spread. When the dust settled and the smoke cleared, recriminations and blaming ensued all around. Does that sound familiar? Sadly, it does. Little could we know that this scenario, known to us who grew up in Los Angeles as the Watts riots, would become a template, become a template for future conflict in our society and even in our own hearts. Racism did not start that day, and it clearly, sadly, has not ended in our own day. While we can take some comfort, and I would call it easy comfort, what in my line of work might be called cheap grace. We can take comfort, we can, in the notion, and I believe it's true, that we're not where we used to be. We're not. We are better. The fact remains that we are not where we ought to be. That's true too. Dialogue and conversation on racism are in their nascent stages in the church and in our society. They're just beginning. And the church, Catholic and non-Catholic alike, has a moral responsibility to bring this conversation to the forefront. Conversation, the dialogue, just the willingness to engage in it, that precedes conversion and substantive change. A significant part of those initial conversations has involved a lot of talk and even heated arguments about Black Lives Matter. It is difficult for some to make the distinction, and we need to, between supporting the BLM, as it's known, the BLM organization as an institution with its own ideology and agenda on the one hand, and I can't, and we can't as a church. It's one thing to support that, and it's quite another thing, on the other hand, supporting and advocating the dignity and the worth of every person on the planet. Of course, Black lives do matter, but the talk becomes so strident, ideological, and politicized that in fact people turn away with deaf ears. They literally and immediately stop listening. They turn these things off that we call our ears. In our Catholic Christian tradition, we've never viewed the dignity of life, the dignity of every single human being through a political lens or an ideological lens. No, it is deeply spiritual lens that we employ, and a prism through which the light of faith, and for Christians that's the light of the gospel, shines forth and reveals the diverse and multicultural nature of our common humanity. Very recently, the California Catholic Conference, that's the gathering of all of the Roman Catholic bishops in the state of California, established a task force on racism and conducted several listening sessions at which a number of Black Catholic leaders in the country and in the state were invited to speak. It was sobering, it was moving, and it was challenging, all at the same time. It is eminently clear that yes, we still have huge problems with race. There are vestiges, leftovers, of damage done recently and from long ago. And all of this, and throughout the centuries, the church has been a kind of microcosm of society, no less susceptible to racism and discrimination, overt and otherwise, than some other institutions. Yet we all need to hold ourselves to higher standards. We find no higher standards than in the Scriptures, which challenge us not so much, if at all, to feel good as to be good. The oft repeated phrases, and we've heard them so often, I'm kind of almost tired of hearing them, but we've heard them often, mostly from politicians. We are better than that. That is not who we are. Those phrases do ring true somehow, but they are hollow. They are empty if not followed or not founded on reality, on real change and conversion of heart. We are just beginning to surface the issue, much less really deal with it. We live in a day and age of quick and simple solutions. This will be long, difficult, and messy. In a word, it will be uncomfortable. Speaking of which, let me continue. I'm almost done, but let me continue with a quote from a very challenging book entitled Long Time Coming. The subtitle, Reckoning with Race in America, written by an African-American professor from Georgetown University. His name is Michael Eric Dyson, who speaks about leaving behind, and I quote, the comfort of swift reassurance that while things are pretty bad in the bigger racial scheme, you're not that bad. The comfort of believing that a few quick symbolic changes here and a few quick personal adjustments there will solve everything. And the comfort that after a few bruising months, things will get back to normal. But the racial pandemic, much like the global health pandemic we're in, has changed some things forever. Let me conclude with some words from St. Peter, who was also writing at a very turbulent time in his own day and age, the first century, at a time when time was of the essence, when people, Peter, the early believers, truly believed that things were coming to a head, that in some ways the world around them was falling apart. But they knew that there was a purpose to all of it and that it was coming to a conclusion. They felt that the parousia, the second coming, was literally right around the corner, could and was going to happen any day now. This is what he wrote. The consummation of all is close at hand. We feel like that sometimes, don't we? Therefore, do not be perturbed. Remain calm so that you will be able to pray. Above all, let your love for one another be constant, for love covers a multitude of sins. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, God bless you, my brothers and sisters, and all of those you love always and in every way.